This is Lightning Power Lunch with Dave Mishkin and Greg Linnelli on Lightning Radio.
It's a huge game. We know it's going to be a huge game for our team. And going back home in front of our fans, it's going to be a playoff-like game, and obviously really excited for that game.
It's tight. It's home ice, and that means a lot in 7-game series. And we're just really working on trying to get our game right for the playoffs, and it's going to be a big test against Toronto.
Big test. Can you have a big game this late in the regular season for the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Toronto Maple Leafs? I think you can.
John Cooper was asked that question this morning.
Did he?
How important is this game? Luke Fox
What did he
is
say?
with us right at the top. So one of Luke's colleagues, Mark Masters, who covers the Leafs, asked that question. And Coop said, the team after this game that wins will say it was really important, and the team that didn't win is going to say, it wasn't too important, which is a very on-brand answer for John Cooper, which is to say that it has some importance, but it's not the same as, let's say, Detroit losing to Montreal last night after they outshot the Canadiens 23-4 in the first period, desperate for points, and they end up losing in regulation, and we're pretty much ready to say sayonara to the teams below the cut line in the East. But anyway, we have the whole hour to get into that.
Well,
we should get Luke's opinion. How important is this game from your perspective, Luke?
Well, I think it means a lot more to the Toronto Maple Leafs than it does the Lightning. They've been very outspoken about how winning the Atlantic Division means something to them. It's a very public and stated goal of theirs. It's kind of funny. They've actually never won that division. The only division this core has won was in the weird lockdown year when they won the North Division playing against all Canadian teams. So they've always been in that 2-3 matchup. And especially when you look at what happened in Sunrise last night, they don't match up very well against the Florida Panthers. So they really want to get first seed. They would much prefer to face the Ottawa Senators. They view them as a more favorable matchup. They want home ice for Game 7 reasons and home crowd reasons, but I think even more so for matchup reasons and to feel like they actually won something. Yes, this has been a good regular season team. They've made the playoffs 9 times in a row now, which is the longest active streak. But rare has it been that they've been a number 1 seed and kind of been, going in feeling like they're playing their best hockey. And they didn't show it last night. So there is pressure on the Toronto side to win it. I think less so on Tampa's side just because they have guys with championship pedigree. They have guys that have won series, whether they have home ice or not. And there's a little bit more built-in confidence that comes from experience in Tampa. Toronto doesn't have that yet. We're all very familiar with their playoff failures. So this is a big one for them, especially in light of the fact they could only muster 1 goal last night against the Panthers.
Luke, we've seen Toronto, but you see them every day. I'm curious from where you sit, what do you love about the team? What makes them a hard out come playoff time? And where do you think the deficiencies still lie, even though they've made some changes the last couple of years, especially behind the bench?
Yeah, the biggest thing I would say, Greg, is defensively they're sturdier, and that's from the net out. They're getting better goaltending than this core of Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Tavares has ever had. And the irony is that neither one of their goaltenders, Anthony Stolarz, who will start tonight and is kind of been circled as the probable Game 1 starter when the playoffs start, he's had a long career, been an excellent backup, but he's never been the guy, never started a playoff game in his life. Joseph Woll has come in relief in a few playoff games and played well, but they're both kind of green when it comes to being a bona fide number 1. It's the exact opposite what you guys have in your town with Andrei Vasilevsky, but they're having a fantastic year. Woll wasn't the problem last night. Stolarz has been on his game. So that's the biggest difference. And then, you start moving out and you got Chris Tanev, a shot blocking machine. He just set the Leafs franchise record for single season shot blocks on Saturday. And, guys have taken a cue from them. They went and picked up Brandon Carlo from Boston at the deadline. So they have more defensemen that are committed to defending. They're better at keeping second and third opportunities down and pushing the opposition to the perimeter. So that's fantastic. And then, they have the game breakers. William Nylander is having the highest goal scoring season of his life. Mitch Marner's having a fabulous contract here. John Tavares has turned back the clock. Matthew Knies has emerged. So they have the high end talent. The deficiencies, especially when I look at them going against the Lightning, is the bottom six. I really like the Lightning's third line. I'm not a fan of Toronto's. They're defensively a little weak. The coach doesn't quite trust them. So you have the high-end talent in Toronto, and then you have a pretty severe drop-off where guys are just hoping to tread water and not get scored on. That's the weakness to me, is the depth, maybe third pair D, and definitely bottom six forwards. That's the soft spot.
Somebody made a comment to me, Luke, maybe about halfway through the year, and it wasn't somebody from Toronto, somebody who was just observing from afar, that the addition of Tanev was a little under the radar, but it had a huge impact on how the Leafs are playing. I mean, you just complimented him for his shot blocking ability, but beyond that, just the rugged defensive defenseman type, tough as nails, hard to play against, seemingly built for the playoffs. How important has his addition been to the Toronto group this year?
Yeah, massive. And they actually wanted him last year at the deadline. Brad Treliving tried to pry him out of Calgary, but just got outbid by Dallas. And the GM was a little bit ticked off that he couldn't get that deal done. So as soon as he became a free agent, he made him a priority. He loved having him in Calgary. So there's a history there. And it's interesting when you say rugged and tough as nails, it comes more from his willingness to sacrifice the body, to take hits, to get in front of pucks, to clear guys out. But he's not a big hitter. He doesn't he's not going to give you the bone crushing hit that even a guy like Jake McCabe might on the Leafs back end. And he's actually injured right now. But Tanev is really smart, great stick, good penalty killer. His breakouts are a little underrated because, the first thing people mention is the fact that he's willing to block pucks with his face, but he makes really smooth, quiet first passes, good breakouts. He's been phenomenal, and they paid a pretty penny in terms of dollars and term to get him, but he's really changed the decor, and he's a right shot, which they've really needed for a long time.
Luke Fox joins us here on Power Lunch on Lightning Radio. I feel like the Maple Leafs aren't afraid of the Lightning, and probably vice versa. Is that something you think, Luke, if they do meet in the playoffs? I mean, still lots to go for that to happen. But in terms of that matchup, while maybe you don't like the Leafs' bottom six, they've had some success against Andrei Vasilevsky recently, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely. And the last time Tampa rolled through Toronto, John Cooper didn't start Vasilevsky, even though, he was rested. And he said, this is always the plan. But, I raised an eyebrow to that because the Leafs have lit up Vasilevsky earlier in the year. They got to him in the one playoff round that they won that people still talk about in Toronto when they did beat the Lightning in the first round a couple years back. They absolutely got a lot of pucks past Vasilevsky, made him look human, right? And this is a guy that is all world. So there isn't the mental scars, I think, for Toronto facing Tampa. They're not as scared of them, I think, because they have proof that they can beat them. And that doesn't mean they take them lightly by any means, but they have had some success breaking them down, whereas they haven't had that success against Florida and previously Boston. And there's more demons in their heads about those opponents, whereas the Lightning, I think they feel like they have a bit more of a mental edge.
Luke, what's going on with the Mitch Marner contract situation from the outside? Again, without being in the weeds, it seems inconceivable to me that this guy does not have a contract yet. Where are things? Do you expect that he's going to test the market? What are the odds that he's going to be back with Toronto next year?
Flip a coin. It really feels like that 50-50 at this point. The reason why he doesn't have a contract is because he and agent Darren Ferris have decided not to negotiate. Brad Treliving's actually, tried to get the contract talks started. You can make a case that he might be their MVP this season. His production's tailed off a little bit, but he's still a threat to get 100 points here. He's fantastic defensively. You just can't replace a guy like that. And as soon as Mikko Rantanen put his pen to paper, Marner is the undisputed top pending UFA of this summer. But the fact that he's unwilling to negotiate, I think both sides are at the point where they want to see how the playoffs play out. A first-round exit, and Marner doesn't look great. This might be his final days as a Leaf. They go to a conference final and he looks fabulous. Maybe that's enough that both sides say, hey, we have something here. Let's keep knocking at the door. So I think a lot depends on how things shake out in the playoffs. And the other thing is when you get this close, it's hard not to take a peek behind the curtain. You've already gone through 82 games, and assuming you get to the end healthy, why not just see what's on the other side? And now all these teams have this incredible influx of cap space because of the spike in the cap ceiling imagine a team like Chicago wants to find someone to play with Connor Bedard. They have tons of cap space. You think about Utah or Seattle, these emerging markets that are desperate for some star power and have, deep pockets, and they could probably take a run. A team like the Islanders needs some star power. Like, you could go on and on. The list of suitors is high. So if he wants top dollar, he's not in Toronto. If he's willing to take a slight discount and loves his current situation, maybe, and they have a good playoff run, maybe he's back. But honestly, it's like flip a coin at this point.
Lastly, Luke, maybe before the season started and things changed, I think a lot of people maybe looked at the Metro, and maybe they have for years, and said, look, 5 teams coming out of that conference or that division, it's going to look pretty good. But it's going to be the opposite, it looks like, here in the Atlantic. You may have 5 teams, obviously, that get in. Surprised by how strong it's been up to this point, and what do you make of the Eastern Conference in general, especially with some of those teams in the Metro? Is Washington for real, even though they've had a tremendous regular season, and you wonder if they're able to continue that wave heading into the postseason? They haven't played well, particularly here at the end of the year.
Yeah, and Logan Thompson's injured, so there are some question marks. I like the culture that they have in Washington and sort of the vibes that they have. That I've been around that team a little bit, and the guys seem to really care about one another. There's a good feeling going in. I love the emergence of a guy like Alexei Protas, for example. The resurrection of Dylan Strome, who's playing his best hockey kind of a little bit later in his career and been on a few stops. And then, of course, it's hard not to mention Ovechkin or, Jacob Chychrun having his best year, getting the new deal. So I don't think they're a fluke by any means. But the Eastern Conference as a whole, I'm pretty disappointed in some of the teams we thought would be stronger. New Jersey, I think, probably looks at their year as a bit underwhelming. Injuries are to blame for part of that. The Rangers are an absolute tire fire. It's unbelievable that the President's Trophy winners are going to miss the playoffs, which is what we're seeing, and in uninspired fashion. Like, I really don't like the level of consistency. It's just not there in terms of what they're bringing every night. I mean, you guys saw it recently. Tampa went in and kicked butt against them. So disappointing, I'd say, on the Metro. And then on the flip side, you have some really feel-good stories in Canada with the Montreal Canadiens. Like, I did not peg them as a playoff team. I thought Ottawa had a chance. That they've now punched their ticket. There's joy in that neck of the woods because they have suffered, and there's been so much drama and off-ice madness, and so it's great, that both Tkachuk brothers are going to be in the playoffs. I think that's going to add some spice and some great marketing. So while the Metro's disappointing, I think the emergence of Montreal and Ottawa are 2 great stories, and they come in playing with house money. Don't rule out the possibility of an upset.
Well, look, we appreciate you, buddy, on a travel day, and it's a busy time, and we'll see you tonight, right? You gonna be at the arena?
I'm at the airport right now. I'm hopping a flight to your city.
All right.
Can't wait. I love the Lightning Leafs matchups. There's always great theater.
It's a lot of fun. Well, we'll see you tonight. Then.
Okay.
Thank you, Luke.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Have a good show.
Appreciate it, Luke. All right, Luke Fox joining us right there. Sportsnet, always good to get Luke. What I like about Luke,
He had a nice spot there up against the wall.
He did.
It sounded like he didn't have a lot of traffic around him.
you could hear the person on the
Yeah. He's at the Fort
microphone,
Lauderdale
but that's
airport.
okay. Yeah,
It's not
But
like he
always-
landed in Tampa and stayed at the
Right.
airport to do our show.
That's right. What I like about Luke, always gives an opinion, which is nice.
Yeah.
Little sprinkles opinion on where
Look,
things
50-50 for Marner. What he said makes sense. I didn't realize Marner and his agent were the ones kind of tapping the
hardball.
brakes, or maybe not even tapping. Hard break, Like, we're not negotiating until the offseason. And, how would Mitch Marner look in Utah or in
any
Seattle?
uniform.
Yeah,
Any uniform.
but I mean, like, those teams
Yeah.
have cap space, and depending on the team, but, they all need a game breaker. Maybe they don't have any. Maybe they have one or two. He would transform their roster. So if he looks to break the bank and get the highest, by break the bank, I mean basically be paid the most, because the cap is going up and he's a free agent. And now that Rantanen is signed, you figure that he's going to reach for the stars financially if he decides to go that route. Presumably then he would go to a team that is not right now a contender, has even more cap space, Chicago. Maybe he's like, I'd love to play with Bedard.
A dark horse.
I mean, yeah.
He goes to Pittsburgh. He goes to Pittsburgh, plays with Crosby, the Dubas factor, and then you've got all that salary cap. He could then be the
You're
face
just
of that
salivating
franchise.
at the
Well,
thought
can you
of
imagine
that.
Marner and Crosby on a 1-2 punch? Because Crosby's still playing at a pretty elite level.
That's true, and they were teammates at the Four Nations.
They're good friends.
But on the other hand, maybe he's like, I really like what we've done here in Toronto, and maybe they go far in the playoffs this year. He's like, I want to stay here. But he would have to take less, which is what the Lightning have been able to do with a lot of their free agents. The core free agents, for sure.
Hard to think that guy would not be in Toronto. And
I cannot believe the Leafs have let it get to this point.
Jeez.
I mean,
look,
it's hard for us to say we weren't in that situation.
We've seen it with Stamkos, right?
But it was a
the
little
first time
different.
around.
I think it was a little different with Stamkos. Stamkos was, his mid-30s. Mitch Marner's, this is the contract for Marner. This is the contract that Stamkos signed when he was 26. Marner's 27. I mean, Stamkos did decide to re-sign with the Lightning, but they had a year starting on July 1 to get this thing done.
The guy you build around.
I mean, if you're going to let and I will call him a generational player. If he's not a generational player, you don't like me using that term, he is one of the best players in the NHL today. There's no disputing. I mean, you heard Luke talk about it. He's bumping 100 points. He's one of the best playmakers in the league. He's not the biggest guy, but he's terrific defensively. He can play power play. He can play penalty kill. He's one of the top minute guys in the NHL. Has he had a distinguished postseason career in the NHL? No, like a lot of his teammates. But there's no disputing that he is one of the best players in the NHL today. So if you're going to pull a guy like that off your roster, I think you have to get something in return. Like, you can't, I mean, they can, but just letting the guy walk, or they have somebody else in mind, and they're like, we're going to bring in a different free agent to change the mix, and this free agent is a good player, may not be at the level of a Marner, but we can pay a little bit less.
Yeah.
We'll see. But Tavares has had a good year, but Tavares is Stamkos' age.
Sure.
How much more are they going to have high-quality play from Tavares? I mean, it's the questions they have to start asking when players get to their mid-30s. Now, Nylander and Matthews are in a different boat. But you heard Luke say, like, he's not crazy about their bottom six. So, and again, I don't know this. This is somebody who is following the Leafs. He's following... If somebody has the hiccups on the Leafs, Luke Fox knows about it. So he knows their team really, really well. That was his opinion. So if they have a little soft underbelly in their bottom six, what does that mean? They have to lean even more in their top six. What's going to mean if Mitch Marner is no longer on their team next year?
Which also means you've got to start defending better. It sounds like that's the case.
Which they are. And adding Tanev has helped, and getting Carlo, that was a really good pickup for Toronto.
Right.
A little surprising the Bruins traded him because he's in the prime of his career too. But
yes. So maybe that's the way to combat if you are going to not have a deep bottom six, or if a guy like Marner does the part, you've got to find a way to manufacture wins another way. So, and partner, before we get to the game tonight and some other questions, there's been a lot of talk. I think this happens when you've got the core four, apparently.
Yes.
That's what it was called. But big three, core four, fab five, whatever you want to call it, dynamic duo.
And Morgan Riley didn't get any love there because he was a pretty important part of their team,
he's
too.
a good player. But
He's a good player.
when you've got a core and you don't win after X amount of years, the question will always arise, do you break it up if it's not working? I don't know if this is how you envision breaking it up by letting a guy walk.
Yeah.
That's different because at least
Well, it sounds like they don't want him to walk, but we've reached the point where, like Luke said, now he's pretty close to that unrestricted free agency point, and it may be contingent on how well or poorly the Leafs do in the playoffs. And by well, it's really based on expectations. They may win a round, but if they don't go to, let's say, the third round, maybe it'll be considered not doing well. And Marner might be like, I'm ready to move on. We'll see.
incredible.
The other thing that Luke said that is interesting, I've heard this on the Lightning side, that the Leafs have had some success against Vasilevsky. Now, not throughout, like the Leafs kind of became one of the better teams to a top team in the NHL. That coincided with Vasilevsky becoming the number one and getting the bulk of the work for the Lightning, basically around the same time. You look at Vasilevsky's career numbers against Toronto, they're good. I mean, they're not as good as they are against some other teams, but they are good. They are objectively good. Since the 2023 playoffs, though, when the Leafs beat the Lightning in 6, Vasilevsky's numbers have been appreciably worse against Toronto. Now, last year, I think we spelled this out. He maybe only got one game out of the 4 against Toronto because 2 came early when he was still recovering from surgery, and then the Lightning played Matt Tompkins in the final game of the regular season. That was that game where Kuch was going for 100 assists and Austin Matthews was going for 70 goals. So I think Vasi only played 1 game last year. This year, though, he has not had good numbers. You can make the argument that 2 of his worst games of the year have come in his 2 starts against Toronto. And Luke is right. Johansson got the last start. Part of that was it was a back-to-back. The Lightning were playing Montreal the next night, and they decided to hold Vasi for the Montreal game. The Lightning ended up losing to Montreal, too. That was that game where Jake Evans scored late. So, I mean, yes, Vasi normally plays the first game. At that point, though, the Lightning wanted to hold off Montreal, or Montreal was closer to the Lightning than Toronto was. So you could make the argument it made sense that they held Vasi for the Montreal game. Be that as it may. His numbers this year against Toronto have not been good, and Toronto found success against him in that 2023 playoff series, which is their only series win with this current group. So what he started off with, he said the Leafs want to get first basically to avoid Florida because they don't like Florida. They don't match up well with Florida. That's what Luke said. He didn't say they match up well with the Lightning, but he basically did say that. He's like, they have a lot more confidence playing the Lightning and playing Vasilevsky. So it's interesting. What does this mean if they meet in the playoffs? You know, I think absolutely nothing. So many times we've seen how things go in a regular season series is not any kind of a bellwether for what's going to happen in a playoff series. So what do you put more stock in if you're looking at Vasilevsky? The fact that he's struggled this year against Toronto, or the fact that he's had statistically the second best season among any NHL goalie other than Hellebuck?
So
and
I think
we talked about yesterday, he's close with Hellebuck in a number of those statistical categories.
So I think I think there's another element to that as well. Not only this year, I think collectively, Vasilevsky just in general, you know, as a guy who you've heard me make that argument with Hellebuck, like that's the guy I want in the playoffs, even if he's having a little bit of an off year. And that's not the case this year with Vasi. For Toronto, that's what they would hang their hat on. They would look at it and say, we've played well against this guy. Even if we have some deficiencies, we know we can get to him. And I think that would be the play for them. And I think they are an improved defensive team.
Yeah.
So that would be an interesting element heading into the postseason. They've had postseason experience, partner, and they've had a little bit of success.
Yeah, when you
It's not
go
like they
to
haven't done
Game
anything.
7,
Yeah.
they've gotten to Game 7 just about in every series that they've lost. They've basically gone to Game 7, including last year when they lost in the second round to Florida. They lost in 5.
Yeah.
But it's not like they don't win in the playoffs. They just don't win series in the playoffs. They win games in the playoffs. They are capable of winning postseason games. It's just that they're losing the 7th game. The other team has gotten to 4 wins before Toronto.
Yep.
So we'll see what happens this year. I mean, a lot of these series that they've lost have been coin toss series. They honestly have been. The Lightning easily could have lost to Toronto in 2022.
Sure.
They had to win Game 6 at home in overtime and Game 7 on the road in Toronto. And I don't know if this is the last time that this really happened, but all this talk about Toronto has success against Vasilevsky. Go back and watch Game 6 overtime. If you can find it, go to the beginning of that overtime, and Braden Point scored. It was not quick. Like, it was at least past the halfway point of that first overtime. Might have been late in the first overtime. Toronto must have had 7 glorious scoring chances, and Vasilevsky stopped them all to save the Lightning season. Vasilevsky was the biggest reason why the Lightning won Game 6 in overtime. It's just since then, Toronto has had some success scoring goals on him. So he also mentioned Stolarz. Looks like he's going to be the guy. Stolarz has had a very good year. He's actually, I think he's 3rd in goals against average. 3rd or 4th, where Hellebuck is 1 and Vasi is 2. Stolarz might be 3rd.
I think the question is, and it's hard for us to gauge, is that it's probably both, but I'd like to break it down. Okay, what's the percentage when you break it up?
Mm-hmm.
Are the goaltenders benefiting more from the better play in front, or has their goaltending improved?
Well, his numbers are better than Wohl's.
Yeah.
And they're playing in front of the same team. I stand corrected. Darcy Kemper is actually 2nd. He has played 13 fewer games than Vasilevsky, though, with the Kings. Kings have had a very good defensive year. So Hellebuck is 1, Kemper is 2, Vasi is 3, and there's, like, Vasi's at 2.14. Stolarz is next with 2.26. So that's a little bit of a gap. It's the same gap, basically, between Hellebuck and Vasi is the gap between Vasi and Stolarz. But there's no disputing Stolarz has been very, very good this year for Toronto.
It's a shame you have these questions, but I think when the margins are pretty small, you start asking those questions about goaltending.
And how is Stolarz going to handle the pressure of a playoff series?
Yeah. I mean,
which he has never really been in that situation.
I think those are fair questions because I think sometimes when you have to experience something first, and sometimes that experience isn't great. And then it's the 2nd or 3rd time around. I mean, it's just like anything else. You get better as you see more of it. Yeah. And if you haven't seen it, I mean, everybody talks about, partner, the playoffs is just a different animal. Things are faster. Things are magnified more. You may play really well throughout a 7-game series, but maybe you have a little bit of a blip in Game 5, and that Game 5 ends up turning the course of the series. So those are legitimate questions that we are bringing up. I also think for Toronto's sake, they probably look at Tampa Bay and say, okay, we know what they're about. We've seen them before. They bleed too. And so I think that'll be probably a card they're going to play a little bit when it comes to Tampa Bay, especially tonight. But we'll see if it happens in the playoffs. I want to get to Sean on Facebook. He says, any need to worry about low shot on goal numbers? I get quality of quantity, especially if they go in like Monday night. But in the playoffs, low shot totals usually don't fare well. And we've seen that pass-first mentality hurt the Bolts earlier this season.
So sometimes the Lightning don't have a lot of shots because they don't have the puck as much. And that was the case in that Ranger game. They didn't. But they had a lead, too. So some of it was how the game unfolded. I mean, look at that Ottawa game. Lightning, I think they had a lot of shots in the Ottawa game. They got goal lead. So, I mean, it depends on the game, Sean. There have been games where the Lightning are passing up shots and maybe passing up opportunities to score because they're passing up shots. And you have to, basically, if you're shooting less to get the same goal production, your shooting percentage needs to be higher. Shooting percentage tends to revert to whatever the mean is, and the mean might be different from one team to the next. But generally, there's a range where, you're not going to have like a 70% shooting percentage where out of every 10 shots, 7 are going in the net. That's just not going to happen. Having said that, because the Lightning tend to look to make plays, some of their shots are actually more dangerous. So I think the Lightning are a team that is probably more likely to have a higher shooting percentage because when they actually take a shot, it's not just some garden variety shot, right? It's look at the shots that they scored on against the Rangers. I mean, those are prime scoring chances that they finished, not including the empty netter, of course. So I wouldn't be too worried about it, Sean. I think the biggest number, and I actually asked Coop about this today because I shouldn't be surprised, but I noted it. I was a little bit surprised. The Lightning enter play tonight, third in the NHL in goals allowed per game. Remember we were talking about this, Greg?
Yeah.
We've been talking about it all year. And we're like, can they get under 3? And you had said, I had said, which I didn't remember. I said it 2.75 would be great.
I think
like,
that's
can
what
they
you said.
get into the top 10? You know, it's like, can they improve from 22nd last year, tied for 22nd, to somewhere in the top 10? Well, yes. And they've been in the top 10 for, I would say, most of the second half of the year. We look at the stats today, 2.58 goals allowed per game. They were helped that Dallas had, I'll call it, an historic collapse last night where they gave up 3 sixth attacker goals in the last minute. They were up 5-2. Vancouver won in overtime. So Dallas gave up 6 goals yesterday. That bumped them just below the Lightning.
Yeah.
And they're in 4th, but still, that's where they are. The Lightning are 3rd. They're 3rd in the NHL in goals allowed per game. So that is the more significant number than shot totals, Sean, to me. Because maybe you run into a team that's D'ing you up. Maybe you're running into a team that's suppressing shots. Maybe you're running into a team that is really effective at limiting your scoring chances. What are you doing at the other end?
I will say this.
And Coop answered the question, answering it in a lot of the ways that we've talked about it, just the personnel, McDonough, Moser, Buy-in, Vasi. He didn't mention Gensel, but that was probably just an oversight on his part. You know, Gensel has really helped in that regard too. And he's like, of course, we have to do it in the playoffs. But, you know, he basically said, yeah, I'm thrilled that we're 77 games in, and here we are 3rd in goals allowed per game.
Nobody had that on their bingo card. I can tell you that. I mean, I certainly didn't. I will say this. I think you have to look at who is passing up the shots and who's shooting. Because I think for the Lightning, your top 6 tends to be a little more picky. Mm-hmm. You know, Kucherov passes up a lot of shots. That's part of what he does. If you're upset about it, I get it, but you're going to have to get over that because you take the good and the bad. And I think that can be contagious on that first line. I think Point and Gensel sometimes can overpass. Cirelli and Hagel to a lesser extent. I think that's contagious with your top 6. If your bottom 6 is starting to do that too, that's a problem. Mm-hmm. Those are guys you want to see get the puck on the net. And I think I would say that probably for any team. It's not uncommon for star players today to have a little bit more of a pass-first mentality. I think you see a lot of teams pass up shots. It's not just the Lightning. I can tell you that 100% games that I do end up watching that are not Lightning related, it does happen. Some of that is the goaltending is a lot better. You know, we saw that the article I keep going back to about Andrei Vasilevsky and save percentage, and it is what it is. And he seems to think, look, I think shooters, they're more fine, they're a little more talented, and they pick their spots. So I'm not facing as many shots either. So I think it's important to see who's shooting and who's passing up those shots before I would get, too excited or whatever.
By the way, Greg, I just want to mention, because the Lightning had a full skate this morning, Gage Gonsalves, who saw some time with Hagel and Cirelli earlier this year, he also saw some time with them in the last game against the Rangers. They were – so the 11-7 formation basically – over the last several weeks, it's been Glendening and Girgensons as the line with 2 forwards, and they've rotated that. What we kind of saw the other night, there were a lot of players that rotated, but Hagel and Cirelli played with different guys, and one of the guys they played with was Gonsalves. He was skating with them this morning, and Nick Paul was on a line with Gord and Bjorkstrand. Gotcha. So we'll see if Coop decides to stick with that. He is going to use the Cirelli line to match, though, against the Matthews line, so that'll be an interesting assignment for Gage Gonsalves. Yeah. If they stick with that.
They do. Well, interesting. Thaw345 on YouTube says, are wingers more valuable than centers, Kuch and Marner, for example?
Well, the prevailing logic for years, and maybe it is still the prevailing logic, centers are very important. If you're weak down the middle, it can really affect your team. But there's logic to what he's saying.
I mean, look, Kucherov and Marner are playmaking wingers.
Yeah. Usually the playmaker is the center. Like, that's the way it used to be, although Phil played center, and he was more of a shooter than a playmaker. Sure. Not playmaker, facilitator.
I think it's that's been the common theme. I think, like anything, Thaw 3-4-5, there are exceptions to the rule.
Pasternak.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a shooter, but he's a winger.
Mm-hmm.
But look at the centers. I mean, McDavid and Draisaitl are both centers. Matthews is a center.
Yeah. Teams who are strong down the middle usually win cups. And the Lightning have been that for a while. And, you know, it's very similar to how you would build a baseball team, right? Up the middle, short, second, center field, catcher. You want to make sure you have guys like that are ready to go. NFL, you want to be strong at the quarterback position for sure and get that situated. So I think Thaw 345, exceptions to every rule. The Lightning, I think, are pretty blessed to have elite players at both positions. Mm-hmm. So in many ways, for them, I don't think it matters, although so much runs through Kucherov, particularly on the power play, that, you know, they're extremely fortunate from that perspective that he is doing what he's doing. But it's a good question.
Yeah.
And it's something that the Lightning are kind of in a unique spot there. Nate on Facebook says, partner, do you think our new captain will take an opportunity to fight someone? I know Hetty is a fair and well-respected player who would normally not want to engage that way, but if he were to use his enormous size and immense strength to crush a bad actor who was unfairly taking advantage of 21, 86, or especially 88, I would pay to see it. Remember, both Point and Stamkos dropped the gloves in the last couple of seasons. Go Bolts.
Yeah, when Point and Stamkos drop the gloves, they are aggravated to the point that they just can't take it anymore.
Mikey,
I'm not sure I can remember Victor Hedman ever fighting, honestly. I mean, if it happened, I'm just not remembering
Somebody
it.
YouTube it, I'm sure it has. Right?
Yeah, I mean, you can look it up, but that's just not his game. And it's not even his game to be the big hitter. He's just very sound positionally. He's a great skater. He's got the long stick. That's why he's so hard to play against. It's just not his game. So the answer to the question is no. I don't think he would be doing that. They have other guys who will, though, notably like Chernak, Lilleberg, has shown a willingness to drop the gloves. Hagel will do it.
Sorelli
will
fight.
Yep.
I mean, they have guys.
Gergensons has fought.
Yeah.
Right?
They have guys who will drop the gloves for sure.
Yeah.
Here's the elephant in the room, too, folks. Do you
All right, he fought David Backes
Backes.
December of 22. I don't remember that at all.
Backes, tough guy.
And that was only a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
By then, Backes was pretty much at the end of the line,
Yeah.
though. He almost couldn't play anymore.
But he could fight. I mean, he had a big body.
Yeah, he was a center. He was a big physical center. He was like his prime in St. Louis. He was a big part of those Blues teams that were quite good.
Here's the thing, though, with Hetty. Do you want somebody who's had concussion issues fighting? Now, look, I've seen Hetty kind of mix it up with guys, and it's never escalated to a fight. I think for some reasons that you've said. Do you really want to fight a guy who's 6'7"? I mean, how big is Hetty on skates? 6'7", 6'8"?
Yeah.
I mean, even if he's not a great fighter, he can punch down on you, and that's just an extremely advantageous position to be in. That being said, why do you want him fighting?
Mm-hmm.
Why? Makes no sense. Let somebody else jump in and handle the business right there. So
one other thing I wanted to mention,
Greg,
because it came out today at the morning skate, Ryan McDonough has been nominated for the Masterton Award. So every team nominates a player, and it's from the PHWA, the Hockey Writers Association. So the writers in each market pick a player off that team.
Yeah.
And, we're talking about Ed Encina and Eric Erlinson and Deandra, Lou, among others.
Right.
So they nominated McDonough. So then he goes into the pool of 32, and there's going to be one winner selected. But, it's about kind of dedication to the sport, perseverance. Ed actually has some of the thumbnail stats that probably swayed them as a group to nominate him. He played in his 1,000th game, the 8th player in history to pass 2,000 block shots, leading the NHL in plus minus. Ed doesn't have that, but I'm mentioning that.
So why don't we just put him?
And he's made it to the playoffs for the 14th time in 15 years.
So
Last year in Nashville was the only time that he missed the playoffs.
Are we talking about MVP criteria? Because I feel like you could
Coop
say
was
some of
asked
that,
about it, and he's like,
you know?
Ryan McDonough is never going to win the Norris Trophy. He doesn't have the points, but
he should.
His value, like Coop was saying, his value is. You can't even put it into words.
Do we have a problem with that? We're just kind of he's never going to win one. Like that's the standard because he doesn't put up points. That should tell you that the system is flawed.
Yeah.
Because
the Norris Trophy is for the best defenseman. It's not the best offensive defenseman.
Yeah, so for us to just, casually just say, look, he's just never going to win it. And we know that's true. That award should go away. Do away with the Norris Trophy. And just say best offensive defenseman.
We are going to have to start to get you, not start to, we have to get you a rocking chair and like one of those old Scottish hats to put on and like a cane. And be like, these awards, do away with all of them.
Are you saying
the
I'm
coach
cranky?
of the year, just pick the cup winner. Norris Trophy.
Am I already getting at that age where I'm just
you're
grumpy?
Annoyed by these awards that they're picking players that you feel like there's no nuance or there's not enough nuance to some of these awards, and then the coach of the year one bothers you because it's a regular season award and it's for that year. It's not kind of how good of a coach are you, basically.
Erik Karlsson won the Norris Trophy, correct?
Yeah, but not in Pittsburgh. It was in I think he may have won it twice, but he won it in San Jose.
When he had over 100 points.
Right before he went to Pittsburgh.
Correct. But he had, by far his best offensive year.
Right.
Let me ask you this.
And did they miss the playoffs that year?
They did.
Or was that their last year that they made the
did.
playoffs?
I think they did. They missed. So I guess my question, and this is,
I'm just,
Erik
where's my
Karlsson's-
rocking chair?
Erik Karlsson's going to go to the Hall of Fame. Okay. Erik Karlsson's going to go to the Hall of Fame, but let me ask you this: if you had a pick,
he's won the Norris Trophy 3 times. By the way.
If you
the last time was in 22-23, and yes, San Jose missed the playoffs, but he had over 100 points.
When he was a minus player. Let me ask you this.
Minus 26, yeah.
Yeah, let me ask you this. Who would you rather have on your team right now, Karlsson or McDonough?
Oh, yeah, no question.
And you might even ask that question during the prime of their career, knowing what McDonough brings to the table. We're just going to look at the offense. But I mean, is Karlsson a minus player in his career? He probably is. And he hasn't done a ton of winning. And so I would probably...
Yeah, looking at his... They don't have it tallied cumulatively.
But just the eye test
I'm looking at his year by year, and, he's had a lot of double-digit minus seasons, more than he's had plus seasons, and he's only been a plus player in double digits twice.
Last year, maybe, with Pittsburgh?
Last year, he was a plus, but not double digits, plus 4.
Right.
So his best plus-minus year was... the 11-12 season, his second year, he was plus 16. And then his second best was in 16-17, which is the last time the Senators made the playoffs. He was plus 10. Now, I will say this for Karlsson. His playoff numbers have been very impressive.
Sure.
He just hasn't been in the playoffs a lot.
No
but
doubt.
I remember them talking about him the year that Ottawa lost to Pittsburgh in 2017.
He was great.
Double overtime.
Yeah.
He was their best player. Like, he was by far their best player. And
100%.
then in 2019, when the Sharks got to the conference final and lost to St. Louis, he was almost at a point per game, 19 games. So when the stakes have been high, he has performed well. But if you look at his regular season numbers as a whole, he's had a lot of goals and points, but his defensive numbers have not been nearly as impressive as McDonough's.
He just hit 200 goals, which is pretty impressive for his career. I'm just
By the way,
saying-
Austin Matthews is at 398 goals. I mean, it's not like I'm keeping track of this that closely, but so when we talk about the OV record, 895, will anyone even get close? Like, I mean, Matthews has a chance here. He's coming up on another year of typical Matthews. He's going to be halfway there. He's going to be in that 440 probably to 450 range, depending on how he finishes this year. And he's going to be in his late 20s. So he would have to stay healthy. He'd have to stay productive.
I mean, could
But
you
I mean,
imagine?
to say that it's impossible, I wouldn't
No.
say that. Not when
guys,
he's basically just shy of 400 goals at this point.
and he's done that. Let's see. He had the 60-goal year. Well, he's
That
had two
helped.
60-goal years, 69
Yeah.
and 60. So you have a couple of those.
I don't
You're
know
gonna
if he's
get to
going to
those
have more of
conversations.
those, though. I mean, there have been some years where he's
Maybe.
like he had the 69 last year, right?
That's
It's kind of
incredible.
alternated for him. He's 60, and then he's
Well, he was
down in
going
the
for
30s.
70 against the Lightning, right? I remember. I feel like I remember that. And
Yeah, Tompkins stopped him. Tompkins made like
Tompkins,
8 saves on him or something.
Tompkins had the game of his life, right?
and Cooch got the assist. All right, Steve has produced all of these
Yeah.
fights that Hedman has had. I am very surprised.
He
but
fought Steve Ott back in 2013.
Yeah, so apparently he did not fight Bacchus,
Okay.
but he fought Matt Calvert October of 19. That was late in the game.
Was he a Columbus
He fought
Blue
Marcus
Jacket?
Foligno in January of 17. He
He's
fought
tough.
Steve Ott in 2013.
Yeah.
And then he fought Kadri in 2013, and then he fought Andrew Ladd in 2012.
I mean, that's
so
all
of
he's
the
coming
fights,
into the league. Right?
yeah, of his 5 fights, three came basically 2013 or earlier.
Right.
He's had 2 since then. Fought Mike Fisher. That was his rookie year, 2010, April of 2010.
Yeah. So he had a few early on.
He had
in
a
his
few
career.
early.
I mean,
and
yeah,
some of that is, hey, big guy, show us what you got, right?
And that happens.
Yeah.
But I think for the most part, I don't think you want a guy like that dropping the gloves. And
No,
I think for the most part, he's been pretty good.
I would agree with that.
Um,
Can I just add one more thing
Yeah,
about
please do.
thing about what Luke said? Luke was
Yeah.
like, they were not very good, the Leafs last night in Florida, and they just didn't have it. They only scored 1 goal. Like, let's give this team a break. Prior to that, they were 5-0-1 in their last 6. I mean, they elevated into first place based on their play.
they did.
So, yeah, they had an off night last night. Florida was due. Florida had come back from a 4-game road trip without a win.
Yeah.
And they got a bunch of guys back. Remember, you were saying, like, some guys were mildly injured. They were kind of letting them heal up. I think Barkov was back in. Forsling was back in. So they had a bunch of guys return. And Florida was due. That was a game. Florida's like, this is it, guys. This is the final homestand of the regular season. We got 5 games left. Now 4. We've got maybe a potential playoff opponent coming in here. Let's do it. And they did it. I mean, they had a 1-1 game. They broke the tie in the third, but they badly outshot the Leafs. It happens. Leafs had an off night.
Yeah.
After playing at an extremely high level, getting into first, clinching a playoff spot, they still control their own destiny to win the division. We'll see how they do tonight in the second half of a back-to-back. But I thought Luke was a little prisoner of the moment there based on what he saw last night. And I'm just looking at kind of not even their whole season, just the last couple of weeks. They've been great.
Friend of the show, George Richards, who is doing some work for NHL.com as a independent correspondent, had yesterday partner that Sam Bennett will likely not play for the Panthers for the remainder of the regular season.
Okay. Healing
That was
up
Paul Maurice.
situation.
Yeah. He said, I just don't think he's back in. He's been dealing with an upper body injury. We're going to take the time for the rest of the season. They've also been, Barkov has missed some games. Reinhardt, Forsling, Sturm, Kulikov.
Sturm had a collision with a teammate. I saw that clip at center ice. I think that was when he got hurt. Remember when the official collided with, was it Hayden Fleury? Remember that last year? Hayden Fleury collided with a referee at center ice. Neither one saw the other, and the referee was injured. And Lightning might have been in Pittsburgh for that game,
Maybe.
actually. Yeah. But it was a similar type situation. Sturm, for sure, didn't see his teammate. I forget the teammate. AJ Greer, maybe, was the guy. Sturm's not a bad pickup for Florida because he's great on faceoffs.
That's
Good
the thing.
fourth
He's
line
really
player.
good.
Was on that Colorado team that won the Stanley Cup and beat the Lightning. But he is still out. But Barkov came back. Pretty sure Reinhardt came back. Forsling came back. Forsling scored last night. We'll see. I mean, how hard are the Panthers going to push here in their final 5 games? And I ask that question because as we look at the standings, Lightning have a game in hand on Florida, a 2-point lead, And as it stands right now, the Lightning would win the tiebreaker. So unless the Panthers somehow catch the Lightning in regulation wins, they need to make up not just 2 points, 3 points. And they only have 4 games left. One is a head-to-head, but that's their final game. So I would say the Lightning they have a more direct path, certainly, to getting home ice than the Panthers do. Panthers have to do a little work, and they're going to need some help. I mean, the Lightning are going to have to drop some games, obviously. Even if the Panthers win that head-to-head at the end of the season, their final game, the Lightning's second to last game. If the Lightning kind of take care of business before then, Florida will not be able to catch the Lightning. But Lightning have to take care of business, and they have a tough opponent tonight, one that has handled them pretty easily, frankly, in the 3 games they've played.
I think the Lightning will be ready for
You
tonight.
would think so.
I do.
They're going to look at that game against the Rangers and be like, we need to be a little better.
Yeah.
Maybe more than a little better defensively, and let's see if that's the focus tonight.
And I don't know how much first place on the line means, but I think it's in the back of your mind for tonight. And I do think if it's there, you take it. And so there's that added oomph, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think that's fair. So I'm excited to see. It's nice to have, a game late in the regular season for the Lightning be somewhat engaging.
Yeah.
It's one thing to talk about Buffalo at Buffalo, kind of get through that. But, Toronto, you've got to figure partner their fans are coming.
Yeah.
And again,
I'm sure they made the
play
trip
for.
to Sunshine State to see their team play back to
Ottawa
back.
clinched. I want to get into that. Ottawa clinched.
And I just want to mention this,
go ahead.
Greg, because I'm looking at the standings.
Yeah.
Ottawa now cannot catch the Lightning in the tiebreaker. Ottawa is 6 points back with only 4 games left, so they can only get to 98. The Lightning are at 96. So if the Lightning just get 2 points at any point, that means they are locked into one of the top 3 spots.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they would have home ice. They would need to finish at least in second. But we're getting, as we say, the sand is running low in the hourglass now, and the Lightning are closing in on this team can't catch them. This team can't catch them. The next team in line, that team can't catch them. So, and of course, a regulation loss by Ottawa in the next game would accomplish the same thing. So, the Lightning have said they want home ice, though.
Right. It's there.
It is there.
It's there for the take. I mean, it really is. The interesting thing becomes you get first place in the Atlantic. You're taking on Ottawa, most likely.
Or
right?
Montreal.
Montreal's creeping.
Montreal's
I know they've won 6
in a row. They're only 3 points back
Did
of
you
the
see
Senators.
who they signed? So they're bringing over one of their Russian draft picks whose season
Montreal.
just finished. Yeah, from the KHL, and apparently.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Apparently, he can play. Now
Yeah.
the question just becomes, how are you going to integrate him into the lineup?
Right.
And the talk is with Marty St. Louis, kind of win now moment, but also building a
Things
little
have
bit
been
for the
going so
future.
well for your team,
know.
though.
I know. But apparently, Ivan Demidov, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Yeah.
They
Or
signed him.
Demidov,
Demidov.
depending on which syllable you're accenting.
But his numbers in the KHL this year are very similar to legitimately some of the really good NHL players who played in that league and then made the jump over. Kuznetsov was one of them that they were kind of looking at his numbers, and statistically speaking, he could, it's not the same as Isaac Howard, but it is maybe in a way, because Montreal probably needs a little more firepower. You can never have enough, but it's how do you delicately include a younger player who hasn't been with you all year onto your roster with a team who's found some chemistry and is obviously clicking
right.
in a very high way. Chris on Facebook said, Mish just said it, Leafs have pretty much dominated us in the last 3 games so far. I think the Bolts take it into account tonight and come out with a great effort. I agree.
Yeah.
Does that mean they're going to win? I don't know. But again, just with everything on the line a bit and first place being there, I mean, look, you have an opportunity to play either Ottawa or Montreal in the first round compared to, a Florida or a Toronto. What are you going to do? Who would you rather take? And that's just logically looking at things. And if those teams end up beating Tampa Bay in the first round, Montreal or Ottawa, you know what? Tip the cap. That's a good effort by them. Probably a great effort. But I think sometimes you have to play your cards right there and play the numbers. And for me, the margins are small everywhere. You take every advantage you can get. Home ice would be one of them, and one of those teams in the first round would be the next.
Yeah.
And that's how I would kind of look at it. But I would anticipate a pretty inspired game, and I'd be interested to see what the fan base is like tonight, because I think it'll be festive, it'll be loud, and I think it'll be one of those games where the crowd for both sides probably gets in. I hope there's obviously way more Lightning fans, but let me know how that plays out. Do you have any final thoughts, partner, on the game tonight, or just kind of what we've seen around the NHL here?
Well, I don't know how much intrigue we're going to have in this final week as far as playoff qualification. Again, I'm going to the standings here. The Montreal winning streak has kind of done in the East what the St. Louis winning streak did in the West. So the Canadiens have an 8-point lead.
Yeah.
So remember, there were 5 teams battling for one spot. The other 4 teams all have the same point total. They all have 5 games left, meaning they can only get 10 points. And Montreal's 8 points up. Now, Montreal looks like they would lose the tiebreaker against just about every one of these teams if they make up that ground. So they're going to need more than just 2 points. But basically it comes down to this. If the Canadiens can get 3 points in their last 4 games, they will have clinched. And they do have an opportunity to overtake Ottawa for wild card 1, as well as Ottawa has played recently. There's only 3 points separating the teams, and they have a head-to-head against one another. In the West, Calgary is 4 points back of Minnesota, but on the wrong side of the playoff cut line. There is a head-to-head there.
Yeah.
But the Flames are going to have to make up 5 points. They have a game in hand. Vancouver won that miraculous game, but Vancouver is going to lose the tiebreaker against Minnesota, and 2 more points from Minnesota will eliminate Vancouver. So basically right now, to me, it's a 9-team race for 8 spots, but Calgary needs that game against Minnesota head-to-head, or else it's going to be lights out. And that game is coming up soon. Might be the next game for both teams, actually. So it's going to be, the final week is going to I think it's going to be mostly about seeding. Not that that's unimportant, but I think the way things were looking, even not that long ago, especially in the East, we're like, oh my gosh, it's going to come down to the last couple of games. But one team has grabbed it and the others haven't. Montreal has grabbed it. Steve is sending some information here. Okay, clinching scenarios.
Capitals will clinch the number 1 seed in the East if the Maple Leafs lose to the Lightning in regulation.
That's a foregone conclusion.
And then the Devils, who are idle, will clinch a playoff berth if the Rangers lose to the Flyers in any fashion or defeat the Flyers in a shootout.
Yeah, I think we can say with a fair amount of certainty it's going to be Devils and Carolina as a first-round series, because neither one of those teams will catch Washington, and they are both about to not be caught by the next Metro team.
Correct.
Rangers, Islanders, and Blue Jackets are all tied. So that'll be an interesting matchup. They met a couple of years ago, if you remember. That was when the Devils beat the Rangers in the first round, and then they played Carolina. Carolina took care of New Jersey in the second round and then ended up losing to Florida in the conference final. New Jersey has had a weird year. Luke said they've underachieved a little bit. I mean, based on where they were last year, though, they've improved so much defensively that it has helped them overcome. I mean, just think about the injuries they've had. Dougie Hamilton, Jack Hughes. I mean, Hughes isn't going to be available for them. Markstrom missed a bunch of time. But they're going to get into the playoffs, and we'll see. Carolina will be heavily favored to win that series.
They will.
But
as they should.
Yeah. Based on their pedigree and how depleted the Devils roster is based on injuries.
Correct. That is correct.
Anyway, you asked me for final thoughts. That's more of a 30,000-foot view of the league. For the Lightning, keep munching points. You want home ice. It's laid out for you. If you take care of business during this 4-game homestand, playing all 4 games against teams that will have played the night before, you should secure home ice at the very least.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. Partner, great job. I will catch you tonight And then tomorrow we will recap this game.
Yes, we will.
Hopefully it's a good one. Thanks to Luke Fox, who joined us earlier today. We may play a little bit of that in the pregame show or throughout the broadcast tonight as well. Thanks to Steve Ersnick and Jared Johnston. Thanks to all of you for listening. We appreciate it. I'm Greg Linnelli. You've been listening to Power Lunch right here on Lightning Radio.